to fascism and to war profiteering, because of course tanks and military vehicles and aeroplane engines, these are all the things that are produced by car companies. So yet again, we get in this we're in this situation where certain corporations profit from war, benefit from war, and want war because it increases their profit, and all corporations need to grow. And if you're making military hardware, you need wars for the military hardware to be consumed and blown up. So you need to replace. So the consumer, namely a state, needs to buy more military hardware off you. And so when we think about words like a permanent war economy, a military-industrial complex, certainly from reading Earth into Property, you'll get a much deeper understanding of these important and germane themes which resonate contemporarily. Ford, for instance, one reason Ford was so conducive to the fascist model of capitalism, the Hitlerian model of capitalism, was because he had such disdain for and dislike for trade unions, and he was infamous for his union busting tactics. One author, which Professor Hall quotes, named Wallace, utters, Henry Ford had a totalitarian state in miniature. Hall writes, Ford's anti-union operatives in the notorious Ford Service Department, or often known as the Ford Gestapo, maintained an atmosphere of violence, espionage, and lawlessness in their repressive oversight of the motor company's workers. This department included among its spies and goons over 2,000 Ukrainian immigrants, known for their pro-fascist and anti-communist politics. So basically, Ford became a prominent funder and supporter of Hitler. I'll reiterate, Hitler had a picture of him, on his wall. So I'll just read another more lengthy paragraph, like I did for the second section of this chapter, where Professor Hall summarizes neatly the general theme about this fascist North American convergence of interests. Professor Hall opines, Ford was a pioneer among those American industrialists and financiers who offered a broadening stream of support for European fascists in helping them move from the fringes towards places of prominence in European politics. After 1927, Ford was pressured by boycotts and negative publicity to back away from his extreme anti-Semitic positions. But both Ford and his famous automobile enterprises continued their special relationship with the National Socialists, a relationship entirely consistent with the Big Push by what was then the world's most famous company to dominate world and global markets. In 1938, Hitler's government honored Ford, as it did Charles Lindbergh, with major Nazi awards. This recognition came with a deep integration of Ford Werk AG, a subsidiary at least half owned by the US-based head office, into Germany's military-industrial complex. The role of Ford Motor Company in the growth and operation of the Hitlerian war machine was one aspect of a far larger project with many influential proponents on both sides of the Atlantic. One of the key strategies was to link the marketing and manufacturing strength of the United States with the legendary German prowess in science and technology. Hitler's plan for the unification of Europe presented Ford and many other US capitalists with the enticing prospect of a huge new unitary and militantly anti-communist market peopled by hundreds of millions of consumers with combined capacity to purchase a vast array of Americans' goods, services and patents. The convergent thinking of Henry Ford and Adolf Hitler is clearly marked in the striking similarities linking the simple, functional designs of the great prototype of American cars, the Model T Ford, and the Volkswagen Buck. So you can see the way that Henry Ford is clearly got his tentacles deeply interwoven into the fabric of the fascist state, and so as far as that section concerned, which was the war on Indians, Slavs, Jews, communists, and truth and the genesis of the military-industrial complex, Hall's basically trying to draw some, try and get the reader's mind around the fact that it wasn't like the other the Axis powers, the Nazis. There were those who were kind of enemies of the state within the Allied powers, such as Britain and the United States. And so also Hall draws upon how the United States had this history of manifest destiny, which much of his book's dedicated to, both the first volume and the second volume. So Professor Hall also coins an interesting phrase in this section, which I thought I'd mention, which was Teutonic manifest destiny. Teutonic manifest destiny. So whereas the United States had their kind of manifest destiny, but so did Germany. Like the United States had their manifest destiny aimed at westward expansion to turn Aboriginal collectively held lands into private property. And on the other hand, you had in Germany this concept of Lebensraum, which was really an idea that the kind of Teutonic, Germanic Übermann had a right to expand into other people's lands. A very similar concept, right? So again, it's the kind of demystification of the kind of othering of the Nazi state. There was many similarities in existence, and there were obviously differences also, which have been belabored, I would say. And so emphasizing the differences all the time, it doesn't give us a kind of holistic analysis, which I think is important for students and scholars to possess. So the penultimate section of this chapter is entitled Hitler or Roosevelt? ? Hitler or Roosevelt? So having kind of demarcated the differences between the two versions of capitalism, the Rooseveltian version of kind of embracing the principles of social democracy, of Keynesian economics, of allowing some degree of trade unionism and collective bargaining to exist, putting checks and balances on corporations, enhancing the role of the state in society with the notion of a good state, a progressive state that's trying to help the population, versus the Hitlerian model of capitalism, which was kind of embracing a more reactionary and absolutist defense of capitalism, which enslaved people, which was a dictatorship, which was authoritarian, which was undemocratic, which was racist, and which was had a permanent war economy, which was militaristic. And of course, having a permanent war economy, that means you're always consuming the military hardware for that war to be permanent, right? And thus attracting the speculators and profiteers of war to your markets, right? To your consumption. So this is one of the shorter sections of the chapter. And I would say one of the main feathers which Professor Hall places in the Roosevelt-Churchill cap or caps is the Atlantic Charter, which Professor Hall views in a positive light as a kind of step towards a kind of a common understanding of our humanity, a common understanding of law, of universal human rights. And he kind of rejects the kind of cynicism of certain historians that this was all about kind of power bargaining, that you'd hear kind of game theorists talk about. So of the Atlantic Charter, Professor Hall writes, from West Africa to India, the Atlantic Charter immediately infused new hope into the struggle by colonized peoples to escape the weight of imperial rule. The document anticipated the fuller consolidation in 1945 of the United Nations and the attempt at Nuremberg to elaborate and enforce a regime of international law to punish and prevent war crimes. Over the signatures of Roosevelt and Churchill, the Atlantic Charter proclaimed, and I'll read you its content because it won't take me more than a minute to adumbrate. It says, first, the countries seek no aggrandizement, territorial or other. Second, they desire to see no territorial changes that do not accord with the freely expressed wishes of the people concerned. Third, they respect the rights of all people to choose the form of government under which they will live, and they will wish to see sovereign rights and self-government restored to those who have been forcibly deprived of them. Fourth, they will endeavour with due respect for the existing obligations to further the enjoyment by all states, great or small, victor or vanquished, of access on equal terms to trade and to the raw materials of the world which are needed for their